Good evening, my friend. Good evening, and I'm so glad that you're able to join me for this bonus discussion. And we're going to, God willing, with the help of Hashem, do this 4 times through the months of Elul. Next week, I'm going to be away, so we won't be able to meet, but God willing, we'll meet the following 3 Tuesdays during this time from 8:30 to 9 to really, I think, remember Rabbi Steinsaltz the way he would have wanted to be remembered, which is through study, rather than really focusing on him as a person, which I'm certainly not qualified, but studying Torah or studying ideas, studying Jewish ideas. That's what every aspect of his life was about. So I'm going to try and keep it to a half hour, even though we could really do hours about it. So, but before we start, I'd like to first thank Jeffrey Burt, because Jeff Burt is the one who actually arranged for me to meet Rabbi Steinsaltz in person. It was the first time I was ever met him. You know, when I was a younger boy, and I was studying by Rabbi Steinsaltz, studying his writings, reading his works, very interesting works. I didn't even realize he was alive, because usually people who write so much, but back then he was very young. And then when I came here, Jeff Burt was kind enough to introduce me to him and to arrange for these ambassadors, Steinsaltz ambassadors, to come here. And they were terrific. They had such an impact on our community, really terrific. And Jeff also gave me his copy of the book that we're going to study tonight, which is called A Dear Son to Me by Rabbi Steinsaltz of blessed memory. And so just before we start, I know Jeff was very close with Rabbi Steinsaltz. So I asked Jeff if he could share a word or two. So Jeff, if you're here, Jeff, I don't know if you're on, but if you are, if you could just share a word about Rabbi Steinsaltz personally before we get started.
You know, you mentioned I was very close to him. The rabbi over his life influenced, I'm sure, 2 million people, in a sense, almost every Jew. And closeness is a degree, but the fact that you met him a few times and you feel you got to know a little bit about him is a reflection of what a tremendously great man he was. I want to add that participating in this small class is Arthur Kurzweil, who authored a wonderful book called On the Road with Rabbi Steinsaltz, or maybe On the Road, because for his last 30, 40 years, whenever the rabbi came to New York, which is many times, Arthur was his chauffeur. But more than that, he was his student, and he teaches courses on it. And frankly, I want to acknowledge him. I was on this spectrum of closeness, far away from Arthur. But those occasions I met with him, interchanged with him over the years, were really the most significant in my life. Footnote next to, of course, the Rabbi Herzfeld's contact, which was much more extensive, but with less significance. And all I can say is that there, are great men in anybody's life. And I don't know, frankly, how I deserve to have as many interactions, maybe 10, 20, 25. I don't know. And one of Rabbi's close colleagues, Thomas Nassel, who is the person who put together the book we're about to read, and sadly passed away about 10 years ago. Thomas once said to me, Jeff, I know you pretty well. I'm not sure what it is that you deserve such an honor. Question that and he was such an insightful person, as you've seen from the collection he's put together. So I feel kind of that this study session we're about to start is in honor and memory of Thomas Nassel, who was part of the rabbi's inner circle for his whole life. And it's just a tremendous honor to be studying now, Rabbi, with you, that you took the initiative and set this up. You may be the first rabbi who has started this kind of study session in the world, because I've gotten messages from his people in Jerusalem that they now want to do this kind of thing around the world. And I said, Shmuel has he's ahead of you. He's already started it. So I hope that these kind of classes, because the rabbi had over 60 books in addition to his translation, and he wanted the Jewish people to change. And this is part of the change his whole life was devoted to. So,
thank you, Jeff. And yes, we are honored that one of Rabbi Steinsaltz's close students. Arthur Kurzweil has joined us. I feel humbled because he certainly is much more qualified to share. He's much more familiar with Rabbi Steinsaltz's writings. But would you like to just tell us just in 1 minute about the book you wrote on the road? I'm unfamiliar with it. Maybe we should get that and also read that together as a community. Would you like to unmute yourself, Arthur?
I got this great job of picking up Rabbi Steinsaltz at the airport at 6 o'clock in the morning whenever he came to the United States. And being in New York, the traffic in New York is terrible. And I always love traffic being terrible when Rabbi Steinsaltz is sitting next to me in the car. So we spent a lot of time in my car over 30 years talking about all kinds of things. And at a certain point, I realized that I had enough material that I could write a book about it. And the rabbi approved, and so I wrote it, On the Road with Rabbi Steinsaltz. Okay,
yes. Well, we're honored that you joined us, and you'll correct any mistakes that we make, or you'll correct our mistakes. I'm sure there will be many. So I read this beautiful book. And Wendy says your book is wonderful. Jeff, do you have a copy of Arthur's book?
Indeed, I do.
Yeah.
Indeed, I may have two copies.
Yeah, because I'm going to, God willing, order one. But in the meantime, until it comes, I definitely want to read that to try and
I'll drop it by tomorrow.
Help me prepare for Rosh Hashanah. So I read this one, this book, A Dear Son to Me, which is such a beautiful book, and it's divided into 4 sections. And I've thought for each of our four study sessions, we would read each of these sections. So the first section is to the Jewish people, and the second section is in the land of Israel. Third is in communities the world over, and the fourth is to the individual. So I read over Shabbat the first section, which is to the Jewish people, and there were really just 2 aspects of it that I wanted to highlight. All of it was beautiful, and you could see, the themes that Rabbi Steinsaltz that he focused on are so consistent with when he said this, which was 25, 30, 40, 50 years ago, consistently preached the same message throughout his life. And I want to just focus on 2 of the messages that he said here. So the first one is, he said, heritage and inheritance. This to me was a very powerful chapter. By the way, I want to encourage everybody to get this book if you can. It's in print. You can buy it from Koren. And it's an easy read. The first was heritage and inheritance, and it's Rabbi Steinsaltz's basic idea, that this is our heritage, and we have to learn it. It's our responsibility to educate ourselves. I remember, and I'm sure Jeff and Arthur can fill me in longer, but I remember when I was growing up, and I was in yeshiva, and the rabbi said, whatever you do, don't use a Steinsaltz Gemara. He's like, that is the worst thing in the world. I mean, he was so creative and brilliant. He was so much ahead of his time. Before there was Art Scroll, there were Steinsaltz. And he understood that we have to let the world learn the Talmud. And he understood he had to make it accessible to everybody to learn. It wasn't accessible. The Talmud was not accessible before Rabbi Steinsaltz started publishing his version of the Gemara. It just was not accessible. People could not study it. And that was just this brilliant, and his ideas are also simple and brilliant at the same time. And he teaches them with such clarity. So I wanted to share with you this midrash. It's a story that he tells in this chapter called Heritage and Inheritance. And I have to say, I'm embarrassed, but I should have known this. I'm a rabbi. I should have known this midrash, but I did not know it until I read it in this chapter. So, and I appreciate his take on it. So here is the story that he says. He says as follows: Rabbi Yanai. This is from a midrash from Leviticus Rabbah 9:3. It's on page 21 of the book. If any of you have the book in front of you, you could follow along with me. If you don't have the book, I'm sure. Jeff, did you ever summarize it? You were going to summarize this stuff, but okay, I don't know if you did.
I didn't have time. Sorry.
Okay, fine. So I'm just going to share this story with you. Rabbi Yanai was once walking on a road and saw a man with the most impressive appearance. He was big, rich, and dignified, whose paunch walked ahead of him. So Rabbi Yanai did not know this Jew, but because of the way he was dressed and the way he behaved, he assumed that he was an important and scholarly person. So Rabbi Yanai went up to him and said, "Would you like to come to our house?" And the man said, yes, of course. So Rabbi Yanai brought him into his home and gave him food and drink. And as they were eating and drinking, he examined the man in his knowledge of the Bible and found that he had none. He examined his knowledge of the Mishnah and realized that he had none. His knowledge of the Agada are the stories, and he saw that he had none. His knowledge of Talmud, and lo, he had none. So it turned out that this impressive looking guest who was conducting himself like this distinguished rabbi was in fact a total ignoramus. So what then, Lowell, so is this story online? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, just us. They have like the first 12 pages and the midrash is in there if people want to follow.
Okay, perfect. So what then could Rabbi Yanai do? So Rabbi Yanai invited this guest to say the Birkat Hamazon, to say the benching. So the guest said, "Let Yanai recite grace in his own home." So Rabbi Yanai understood that this guest did not even know how to recite this blessing. So he told him. So Rabbi Yanai said to the guest, "Can you at least repeat what I say?" So he said, "Yes." So said Rabbi Yanai, okay, brace yourself for this. Rabbi Yanai said to him, instead of saying grace after meal, say, "A dog has eaten Yanai's bread." A dog has eaten Yanai's bread. So Rabbi Steinsaltz writes, this is Rabbi Steinsaltz saying, this is certainly an offensive statement, but this was how Rabbi Yanai felt. He felt like this man who was just empty vessel, he called him a dog. And so, let me just stop there. What would you make of this story? Here it is like a typical story where the elitist scholar is insulting this guest. But the guest, the ignorant person, the ignorant, empty person, stood up and grabbed Rabbi Yanai and saying, he grabbed him and he said, "My inheritance is with you, and you are withholding it from me." Look what he said. He said, "My inheritance is with you, and you are withholding it from me." And in doing so, by the way, I'll pause here for a moment. The Midrash is so brilliant and turns the whole story on it flips the whole story. We had started off by reading the story as saying, oh, Rabbi Yanai is the scholar, and this ignorant person is the fool, the waste of a life. But just the opposite. Now, the Midrash flips the story that the ignorant person is the one who has clarity, and Rabbi Yanai is the fool. And now is this just tremendous accusation against Rabbi Yanai. You're withholding the inheritance from me. You should have been teaching me. And instead you're calling me a dog. Your responsibility is to teach me. So this is what Rabbi Steinsaltz continues. What legacy of yours is with me? Asked Rabbi Yanai, puzzled. He replied, I once passed by a school and heard the voices of little children saying, Moses gave us a Torah, the inheritance of the congregation of Jacob. They did not say the inheritance of the congregation of Yanai, but the congregation of Jacob. And the way let me read Rabbi Steinsaltz's paragraph, and then we'll come back and discuss it. And so this is how the story ends. Rabbi Yanai felt ashamed because he had become aware of his guest's true stature. The man's total ignorance was no reason for Rabbi Yanai to humiliate him. The Torah does not belong to Rabbi Yanai and his friends, but to the entire Jewish people. Therefore, the person who knows no Torah is not a dog. He's an educationally deprived person, a spiritual pauper who should be pitied and not abused. And so we need, this is what I think Rabbi Steinsaltz is saying. This is in the context of Rabbi Steinsaltz really standing up to the elitist Jewish community, which was reluctant to make the basic works of our faith accessible, and basically calling people, without saying it, but calling them dogs, by saying, we're not going to provide for you the tools to have the Talmud unless you spend as many years and as much time as we have in yeshiva. But, but what Rabbi Steinsaltz was saying is that he's citing this midrash as saying that the Torah is ours. The Torah is all of ours. And so therefore, it's our responsibility the Torah doesn't belong to the elite scholars. It belongs to every Jew. It's our inheritance, and it's our heritage. And that's why Rabbi Steinsaltz was saying this. And this was really a revolution. He's not the only one, but he was probably the most prolific one in really bringing and transforming knowledge within the Jewish community with his translations. And with his, even with his Steinsaltz ambassador program, what he did there was just really astonishing and brilliant. He wanted he took boys from his yeshiva and he sent them to homes, and he said he preferred that they would go into non-kosher homes to live. Because he said that we're not going to be like Rabbi Yanai in that story that looks at the person who's not educated as a dog, but rather the onus is on Rabbi Yanai to not withhold the teachings of Torah from these students. So let me just finish this paragraph, and then we'll open it up to any comments. So said Rabbi Yanai to that person, what then has made you worthy of eating at my table? By the way, Rabbi Steinsaltz wrote this, I don't know if I said it, in 1984. 1984, he said this. Today, everybody takes these concepts for granted, but at that time, I told you what my rabbi said. And my rabbi said that in 1992 or something, so it's even 10 years after this. So said Rabbi Yanai to that person, what then has made you worthy of eating at my table? I must assume that if you merit my company, you must have done many good deeds. So the man replied, never in my life have I heard something negative about someone and run back to that person to tell him about it. Never in my life have I seen two people fighting without having made peace between them. So said Rabbi Yanai, so much civility and good manners are in you, and I called you a dog. And he applied to him the verse, he appraises his path, he who assesses his actions is worth a great deal. So Rabbi Yanai understood, I think what this part of the Midrash is saying is that we can learn from even the unlettered, and Rabbi Yanai was a typical intellectual elitist, a scholar, without thinking he could learn anything from this man, and now he realized that this man was just a holy person, and the guilt was on Rabbi Yanai. So let me just pause for a moment and see if anybody has any comments on what we just said.
Rabbi?
Yes, sure.
A few days ago, I think it was on Sunday, there was, I had the chance to be on a Zoom with the Steinsaltz ambassadors and their hosts. And one of them brought up this exact point. And he said that when they were getting a send-off, Rabbi Steinsaltz told them, they asked Rabbi Steinsaltz, do you have any advice for us? And he said, don't be a rabbi. Be yourself. Get to know, the most important is to get to know the people. And go from there and learn from them.
And that's very, very unusual. It sounds nice and simple and makes sense, but not everybody saw the world that way. I just want to finish this little piece by just quoting this paragraph, which I think to me summarizes what Rabbi Steinsaltz's philosophy was about. He said, this is on page 26, he says, this heritage, which is our heritage, the Torah, which means knowledge, Jewish knowledge, must therefore be transmitted and distributed even to those who do not know it exists. One who holds in his hand even a tiny portion of this treasure has no right to keep it to himself. This is a direct personal calling. It's not the responsibility of lawyers or of institutions or organizations. It's the simple humane duty incumbent upon me, who sees, and then he basically sees princes roaming in the streets. So basically, I guess one takeaway which everybody should have from tonight is everybody on this Zoom call, and we're all coming at this with different levels of knowledge because we've all been studying for different amounts of years, but everybody on this call is has an inheritance, a heritage, which is the Torah, and B, has a responsibility to transmit it. We have a responsibility to transmit it to other people. Well, if we have an inheritance, we're not allowed to keep it to ourselves if we know it belongs to somebody else. So it's our responsibility to transmit it, even if the other person doesn't even know it exists. That's what Rabbi Steinsaltz said.
Rabbi, isn't there a tradition that the Torah was read twice a week to the public and in public in the public forum in the village square, so that it was made accessible even to people who couldn't read, actually?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
Rabbi
yeah,
Steinsaltz
right.
is in that kind of tradition, right?
Oh, for sure. And in fact, you go back to the Torah itself, which says the Torah has to be written in 70 languages. I remember when we met with Rabbi Steinsaltz, I remember saying to Rabbi Steinsaltz, okay, so if you have, I had a few times to meet with him, an opportunity, but I remember saying to him, so if a person is not, has not been really connected to the faith, we have an opportunity to recommend one book to this person. What book should we recommend? And this is what he said. He said, there's a good book. It's been translated a few times. It's called the Torah, the Bible. Okay, so now, with the few minutes we have remaining, I'd like to go to, he has another beautiful chapter, which I really want to recommend that everybody reads, which is called The Rebbe's Century. And what this was after, Rabbi Steinsaltz wrote this beautiful, memoir, biography of the Rebbe. And then 18 years ago, in 5762, after the Rebbe died, Rabbi Steinsaltz went to the Library of Congress and gave a eulogy, kind of, for the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Gave a eulogy for the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And what he said in this thing was just so brilliant, and I think also appropriate for us in our time today. So first of all, he said, all the struggles that we might be going through now with Corona, with whatever we're seeing, like political upheaval, with pandemic, and they should all end soon, God forbid another person should die. But when he talked about the Rebbe's life, what did the Rebbe see? The Rebbe saw in his lifetime, he saw what he read. He said he saw the totalitarian dictatorships in the Rebbe's lifetime emerge. So I guess he's talking about this was maybe he said this on the 100th anniversary of the Rebbe's birth. Maybe that's what the speech was. So he saw all Russia, Germany, Italy, and Spain become these just tremendous totalitarians. He saw the map of the world change. He saw tremendous changes in science and psychology, psychoanalysis. He saw these just theory of relativity. The whole world completely changed during the Rebbe's lifetime. And he saw within the Jewish community, he saw this incredible growth of explosive knowledge, the Holocaust, the state of Israel. There was all of these things. Each one of them would have been unprecedented. But the fact is they all happened in the Rebbe's lifetime. And his argument was that this profoundly influenced the Rebbe, and to make it so that the Rebbe has a basic idea that the Rebbe was basically deciding that as a result of this, we need to respond with an urgency an urgency to transform the world for the better. And his point was, when you see this tremendous upheaval in the world, take it as a sign upon ourselves, not to panic, but to try and transform the world for the better. And this is what he writes here. He says, the Rebbe did not leave a legacy. The Lubavitch Rebbe, he said he did not leave a legacy. The Rebbe left us marching orders. Not a legacy, but marching orders. That's what the Rebbe left us. He left us marching orders. The Rebbe left a task to be completed. And he didn't leave speeches. He left resources to help us complete our task, which is the task of transforming the world. And this is what he says to me, which is just like when I read this, I'm like, yes, yes. He said, when we speak about the coming of Mashiach, we are speaking about something where what's going to happen is we're going to suddenly realize what's important in this world and what's not. And we're going to set our priorities accordingly. We're talking about recognizing what we should be thinking about. He says, when we are expecting Mashiach, we're expecting things to change in a major way, and we are going to have to make major changes. We're going to cast away a huge number of petty quarrels. Our insignificant clashes are not only vicious and unprofitable, but ludicrous. That's what he says. Next to the truly momentous changes we are anticipating, all our trivial arguments shrink into trifles. Our disputes are comical, not just painful. And he says, I'm not speaking about personal quarrels, but all the nonsense in this world, which we are wasting our time on, all this nonsense. He says, whether party A or party B will have a particular right or authority seems ridiculous. Who will remember when we have these momentous changes in the world, all the foolish people fighting about such things? He says, when the tidal wave envelops the world, no one will remember if my shop was on the west side or the east side. Everything will be moved. The coming of Mashiach means, among other things, the casting away of internal quarrels, internal squabbles, abandoning interdenominational quarrels, for example, which are short-term calculations. The Rebbe is giving, Rabbi Steinsaltz is saying, the Rebbe is giving us a marching order to care about important things, to stop wasting our time on unimportant things. That's what it means to call for the Mashiach, to call for a time where the world is focused on the important things. What are some of those important things? What are some of those important things? He says as follows. It means genuinely, this is on page 64 of his book, he says, it means genuinely being concerned about every segment of society, not just in working on the details, but in major areas, addressing rifts among ethnic groups, growing gap between the rich and poor, making education a universal ambition, and bringing the whole country he's talking about Israel, to an awareness of the divine. And what he is saying is, this is what it means. It means our perspective on life is going to be completely changed. We're not going to be focused on the nonsense. Instead, we're going to think big, dream big, and make this type of transformation. And this is what I think how Rabbi Steinsaltz was living his life. I think he lived his life, he just didn't even care about this nonsense, like these like interdenominational or political squabbles amongst different rabbis or groups. He was just so above that, thinking about the areas of importance, about how are we going to transform this world. And so he writes like this. He said, I want to say this. He said as follows. He says, this does not mean that we must invalidate what we are doing. He said, it doesn't mean we should invalidate. It just means that we have to work on a grander scale. We have to act in a more urgent way. These ideas have to be expressed not only to individuals, but basically we have to repeat the call of the former Rebbe. Tshuva now, redemption now. Whatever has been done is not enough. It is never enough. We have to do 10 times as much. if we want to be ready for the times that are coming. 10 times as much. This is what Rabbi Steinsaltz said was the marching orders of the Rebbe. And I feel like this is the marching orders of Rabbi Steinsaltz. We have to do 10 times as much as what we're doing, and on a grander scale, and thinking bigger, and not being focusing on the minutia and the nonsense, but thinking about these powerful universal values, that things that are going to bring up our entire world. Are our efforts something that's going to bring up the entire world, and using every single last possible second and energy that we have to try and make this difference? That's what I see here. The one last paragraph, he says as follows. He says, page 67. I'm going to read this to you. You're going to get some goosebumps, okay? He says, our sages tell us in reading Genesis chapter 49 that our father Jacob did not die. The idea is that as long as there are Jews in the world, the seed of Jacob is alive. And Jacob lives within us. In everything we do in our lives, a small part of him lives within us. We say in our prayers, David, king of Israel, is alive and enduring, which means the kingship of David never died. Someone could kill the last Jewish king, but no one can destroy the kingship of the Jewish people. It's still alive. We may be downtrodden, we may be kicked, but the kingship of Israel continues. So that's what I say about Rabbi Steinsaltz. That Rabbi Steinsaltz, as long as we are working towards his vision, he is alive, like Jacob our father is alive. And how do we work towards his vision? We read his books, we act on it, we take the marching orders, we understand that we have a limited time, and we're going to try and bring a redemption to the world. I'll take any questions. Yeah, Jeff, did you want to say something?
One last comment. Every day, Arthur has a blog where he has a quote, several quotes, just one, about 4 paragraphs from Rabbi Steinsaltz. It's free. Please email me and I'll give you the details on how to get on this blog. But it carries the enthusiasm we've just heard into your daily life. And the Rabbi Steinsaltz wanted all of us, the 27 on this call, to be ambassadors of the words that you just so brilliantly put together, Rabbi. Thank you.
Okay, so I hope, God willing, in 2 weeks we'll meet again to discuss Rabbi Steinsaltz's writing the next part of A Dear Son to Me. And it's been real meaningful for me to discuss this with you. If anybody has anything else to share before we go?
Just to say, my father never learned Talmud because he went to a public school here in Fredericton and then went to university with most of the people were going. But when he made Aliyah and somebody gave him the Shabbat volume, the 2 volume of Shabbat Steinsaltz, he started immediately 3 chavrusas with 3 other scientists. And until he was the last of the chavrusas to die, like all 4 of them have passed already, but he was the last one of the 4. And
Beautiful.
And that's how they learned. And they were
beautiful.
Yeah. May the memory be blessed.
Amen. Okay, my friends, I wish you a good night. A good night, my friends. I thank you for joining me, and God willing, we'll see you maybe tomorrow for Torah study. All right. Shabbat shalom. Good night. Good night. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
I love
Good night,
his
good night.
humility. His
Good night,
love
good
and
night.
Rabbi.
humility.
Good night.
You know what I mean?
Yes, humility. Yes, he was
And
very
you-
humble man.
Reminds me of you. You have it.
All right. Good night, my friends. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Hi there, Cheryl.